What is going on, guys? My name is John and welcome back to yet another video. Last week I uploaded a video on beating Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver using only Pokemon that you can catch with the Pokewalker, which was a really unique challenge that required both a lot of different strategies as well as some exercise to get the job done. While this was a pretty fun challenge to use a small group of the Pokemon, what would it take to get them all? Today we're going to find out how easy you can catch every Pokemon with the Pokewalker. So if you haven't watched the last video on the Pokewalker, you can check that out in the top right corner of your screen to better understand some of the more basic concepts of this little device. But as always, we'll go over a lot of the stuff from that video so you're not out of the loop. Before we get into the challenge, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. Roughly only 40% of the people that watch my videos are actually subscribed, and if you end up not liking my videos down the road, you can always unsubscribe at any time. With all that out of the way, let's just jump right into it. So like I mentioned in the last video, the Pokewalker was essentially a pedometer that converts the steps that you take with the device into watts, which can then be spent to obtain rewards like special in-game items, but most importantly Pokemon. If you attempt to catch Pokemon early enough in the game, you can encounter some really unique Pokemon that you wouldn't normally play with, as well as a bunch of Pokemon that can be obtained through the device in the post-game that you can't find anywhere else in the overworld. The game splits up this collection of Pokemon with courses. Courses are little locations that you can choose at the beginning of your walk that allow you to catch a specific set of Pokemon. Think of them in the same way as the locations in the game. The encounters that you find on Route 29 are completely different to what you'd encounter fishing at the Lake of Rage, so they implemented the feature so you can have a more diverse list of Pokemon to encounter on your strolls. When it comes to catching all the Pokemon through this device, unlocking courses is probably the most difficult aspect because of the amount of watts that you need to get them all. Although you do have to spend 10 watts to encounter a Pokemon with the device, if you end up not using all your watts when you return the Pokemon back to your game, it will deposit those watts and contribute them to unlocking new courses. Initially you're given 2 courses, but you can unlock another 6 before you beat the game, as well as another 12 throughout the post-game. Although you can obtain the ones to the Pokewalker quite fast by just casually walking around with it for a week, the post-game courses won't unlock as fast as you'd like them to. To give you a good frame of reference, to unlock the first 8 courses, you'll need to collect 3,000 watts, which essentially comes out to roughly 60,000 steps, and that's not including the ones that you take and then spend on Pokemon and items you try to get along the way. The next course requires you to collect another 2,000 watts, and the growth only increases from there. Apparently, the average person only walks about 3,000 to 4,000 steps a day, but to make it a little bit easier to do mathematically, let's just round it up to 5,000. When I was working on the last challenge, I would take my Pokewalker to the store to get groceries, and I'd end up getting about 1,000 to 1,500 steps in that time. So just keep in mind that to me, this seems like a pretty low daily number. Now, if you were to take a guess as to how many watts you need to deposit to get to the last course, what would you say? 10,000? 20,000? 40,000? The final course requires you to earn 100,000 watts, or essentially take 2 million steps without spending any of them to catch Pokemon. This means that if you have an average of 5,000 steps per day, it would take you 400 days or basically over an entire year to reach that point. Now, from my personal experience, I managed to get about 8,000 to 10,000 plus a day because I would try to really get those steps in, but even at that pace, it would take me about 7 months if I started from a brand new game. Sure, that's a lot of great exercise that you'd be getting in, but if you wanted to get them all unlocked in say something like a month, you'd need to walk over 60,000 steps a day, which I'm sure is totally possible, but you'd be spending nearly every hour of your day dedicated to doing just that. Apparently this woman ended up walking 100,000 steps in a day, and it took over 15 hours. And if we compare that to our daily goal, it would take about 9+ hours and nearly 30 miles, or 48 kilometers, of walking every single day to unlock them in a month's time. Yikes. And that's only just to start the challenge. Catching your Pokemon is a completely different animal. Although there are many duplicates and Pokemon of the same evolution line that you can encounter, there are 103 different species of Pokemon you can encounter between the main and post-game courses, which is once again a ton of watts that needs to be collected. It's important to keep in mind that although you do have a strong chance of catching the Pokemon if you bring its health down to 1 HP, you only have one opportunity to catch it before you have to try and hunt it down again. To give us a baseline for how many steps you need to take, let's just assume that in a perfect world you encounter every Pokemon you need on the first try, and then also catch it on the first try. That alone will take you 20,600 steps. Now let's be a little bit more realistic. Just like in the actual game, the Pokemon you encounter through the Pokewalker have percentages for a chance to encounter them. While you do have a certain amount of steps in a day that you have to take for specific ones to appear, some Pokemon like Elekid in the suburban area have a 15% chance of being encountered after walking 5,000 steps. Granted, you'll have a ton of watts to spend once you reach that step count, so you'll absolutely encounter one at some point. But knowing that on average you'll have to encounter 7 Pokemon before you find just one means you'll have to walk around 1,400 steps, which doesn't even account for if you fail it. Another fantastic example is Spiritomb in the Quiet Cave. Not only do you have to walk a whopping 10,000 steps just to find one, it has a 5% encounter rate. Thankfully, a lot of these Pokemon have about a 50% encounter rate as long as you stay within their step group. However, some Pokemon like Spiritomb and Munchlax can take you forever to just encounter it in the first place. I listed off all the Pokemon with their easiest locations in a spreadsheet and roughly calculated how many encounters it would take based on their percentages to catch, as well as how many watts you need to spend in the process. Assuming that you are lucky enough to catch them all on the first try, you need about 3,220 watts, or walk about 64,400 steps to catch every Pokemon. Considering that you can definitely walk 60,000 steps in a single day, this is 100% possible to do. However, there are a few more things you have to consider. I didn't mention this very well earlier, but when it comes to getting Pokemon through the Pokewalker, there are 3 groups of encounters that you can find, and they're usually based around 3-step milestones that you can hit on your walk. Group C is the one that allows you to catch Pokemon by basically doing nothing, as it requires you to walk 0 steps to encounter a specific set of 2 Pokemon. Obviously, you'll need to walk the 200 steps to get enough watts to encounter one in the first place, but you get the idea. Group B contains Pokemon with steps from 500 to 4,000 plus, depending on the course that you're on, and while this allows you to potentially get 2 new Pokemon, you also have to keep in mind that you have the chance to encounter Pokemon from Group C as well. This means that you're definitely not guaranteed a Group B Pokemon, but the odds are mostly in your favor. Group A is the highest tier, and step counts range from 2,000 to 10,000 steps, and generally these are the hardest to obtain, like I mentioned earlier. One very important thing that you have to keep in mind if you choose to do this for some reason, is that when you send one of your Pokemon to walk with you in the Pokewalker, the game randomly selects one Pokemon from each of the 3 groups, which means that no matter how many times you encounter Doduo in the refreshing field, you'll never encounter Kangaskhan during that stroll. This sounds like it'd be really annoying to deal with, but you have to consider that you'll know basically immediately if this course is the Pokemon you need, and if you end up not having what you want, you can just return your Pokemon into the game and then start another stroll and then check again. Although some Pokemon can be pretty rare to find, it's a 50-50 chance that the Pokemon you want from the group is available on your walk, and all you have to really deal with is the percentage of actually encountering it. Now with this in mind, there is another roadblock that you have to consider. Let's just say that you want to catch them all in a day. Like I said earlier, it's totally possible. Let's just say that we go through the Treehouse course and catch everything that's available. If we try to go to, say, the Warm Beach course, we're almost guaranteed to only find Pokemon from Group A and Group B, because at 7,000 steps, Magikarp and Goldeen would have an 8% of encountering, when if we didn't take any steps before doing the course, it would have been 100%. The point I'm trying to make here is that in order to catch them in the most optimal way, it's best to go for all the Group C Pokemon in the Pokewalker before even touching any of the other categories. It's absurdly easier to catch Pokemon with 500 steps than it would be to catch 7,000 step Pokemon every single day, as you'd essentially have to wait for 24 hours to roll around so you'd lose your steps for the day, and then have to walk another 7,000 just for another course that you want to get a Group A Pokemon. On the flip side, there is a neat little trick that can save you some time. When you connect your Pokewalker to your cartridge or go to return from a stroll, the game syncs your Pokewalker to whatever the date and time is on your DS. This means that if you roll your clock back to the beginning of the day and reconnect, you can add more time to your day if you think you can't reach your step goal. This means that you can also end a day and reset your steps if you need to start fresh, which is actually a big help because of how many times you're going to need to catch Pokemon with 0 step requirements. By the time you caught both Pokemon, you've usually walked enough to encounter Group B Pokemon, so this can help you manage your encounters a little bit better. With all this information in mind, what's the best way to complete this? So if we combine all the information we've talked about so far, this is realistically the most optimal way to catch every Pokemon available on the device. The first thing you're going to want to do is unlock all the courses. Like I mentioned before, this will take you more time than anything, and if you really want to get those steps in, just throw it in a backpack that you take to school, or attach it to your keyring for your car. This way you'll almost always have it with you when you're moving. Obviously keeping it in your pocket would be the best because it tracks a little bit better, but I feel like it's a lot easier to forget to bring with you, and at the end of the day, there are quite a few ways you can kind of forget about using it and check your progress every week. I like to note that since it tracks movement, you could technically just shake it all day and make the device think you're training for the Olympics, but keep in mind you'd be doing that for like 5+ hours a day, so I'm not really sure if that'd actually be fun. Now if you've prepared all your courses, it's time to actually start the challenge. For every course in the game, catch every Pokemon available in the Group C category. Like I said before, all of the Group C requires 0 steps for them to appear, so this should realistically take a few hours once you get the hang of it. During this process, you're going to be gaining steps for the day, and you're definitely going to need to reset a few times because of how much you'll enter the 500 step mark for a lot of the Group B Pokemon. But you can also decide if you want to grab a few more of these Pokemon along the way. Personally, I would disagree on doing that because your chances of finding Group C Pokemon will decrease by a lot, but it really depends on how many steps you plan on taking during the day. Once you completed all of Group C, you guessed it, it's time to take on Group B. Thankfully, this process is a lot easier than Group C because you probably won't need to reset your steps from here, as the step requirement increases quite a lot the later you get into the courses. I'm not going to list off the courses because I think that would be a little bit annoying to hear, but this is the recommended course order I think you should walk in, as well as the minimum and maximum steps you'll need to encounter a Pokemon. I know mentioning max steps may sound weird, but this is actually the most important thing to consider. Knowing the point where you no longer have the highest chance of finding the Pokemon you want is arguably the most important thing you can know for a challenge like this. For example, Scary Cave has Golbat in Group B at 500 steps, however I put it halfway through the list because that 65% chance of encountering doesn't change until you pass that 5,000 step mark. This makes it so rather than focusing on reaching Group B's step requirement, you're more mindful of how close you are to reaching Group A's. Like I said, it's going to be pretty difficult to go over your step count considering it's going in nearly 1,000 step increments, but it's entirely possible that even with the most optimal route, you'll have to restart the day and build up those steps again. Overall, Group B should take you quite a bit longer because you're mixed in with Group C encounters, but if you're lucky, this should only take another few hours to do if you're catching them as you walk. Believe it or not, Group A is almost just as easy as Group C aside from one thing. Because Group A is the highest tier, if you go past, say, Resort's 8,000 step count for Pikachu and Pachirisu, your chances stay exactly the same. No matter how far you walk, as long as you meet the minimum amount, they'll still appear. This means that since the highest Group A course requires 10,000 steps, you can just walk that distance once and be set for every encounter on your Pokewalker. The only downside to this part of the challenge is that although a majority of the encounters are between 30 to 60% in this group, like I mentioned before, Pokemon like Spiritomb and Munchlax are really annoying to encounter because they near the single digits. This means that you could be hunting for that 5% Spiritomb, spending tons of watts, only to encounter Munchlax after 11 tries and realize that you just wasted all those watts for a Pokemon that you already have. On the upside, these two Pokemon are among very few at this percentage, so you'll probably find what you're looking for very quickly on most courses. Once you manage to catch them all, you should be done with this challenge, right? Well, not exactly. So, although you've collected all the Pokewalker Pokemon available on the cartridge, there are actually more Pokemon you can get through some specific tasks. In total, there are 7 additional courses in the game, however, nearly all of them are unobtainable as of the day this video goes up. Technically, the only one that's still available is Night Sky's Edge, which requires you to trade a Jirachi to your game, however, there is another that's kind of in a gray area. Beyond the Sea requires you to do an international trade in the GTS, and although the official Nintendo servers are down, there are servers hosted by other people that you can easily connect to. Does this mean that you'll actually be able to trade something? Probably not, because I presume they'll be the same Sentret looking for a level 100 Arceus that they've always been, but this is still technically possible to get. The remaining 5 were all Wi-Fi events, however Yellow Forest and Winter's Path were the only courses to reach international copies. Thankfully, I still have my original games with these on them, but to my knowledge the other ones are completely unavailable. I'm not sure if you can get them through the DNS exploit, but if I'm being honest, you're not really missing out on much here. I mean, personally, I don't think anyone watching this is dying to take a walk on the rally course. The only thing you can get from here is Chatot, and this is basically the only thing that it's good for. One other important thing that I kind of brushed over is the fact that although I've really only shown me catching one Pokemon with the device, you can actually catch 3 per stroll that you take with your Pokemon. This means that realistically, you can catch half of each course every time that you go for a stroll. I know this may sound like it'd be easier to catch them all, and that may be true for a few courses, but realistically you're going to have to give so many more attempts to catch them all because of the heavily decreased catch rates that Group C has when you transition to the higher ranks. The one last thing I'll note about this is that for the really crazy gamers that want a complete list of every individual Pokemon from each course, there is one course that will be unbelievably annoying to complete. The Yellow Forest DLC contains only Pikachu, however they all know varying moves like Fake Out, Shockwave, Volt Tackle, and even Surf and Fly. The encounter rate is literally 2% after 10,000 steps for Flying Pikachu, and since you can't even tell which one you caught until you transfer them, you're in for a lengthy challenge if you really want them all. Overall, this challenge is definitely a pain to set up, but personally I think that the actual challenge of getting them isn't too difficult if you use the plan that I made. Would this be fun to do in a day? Probably not, but I think this is a neat thing that you could do over a couple weeks that really make your Pokemon collection a lot more unique. If you're interested in trying this out for yourself, I've included some links, including a spreadsheet that I made to prepare you for your long journey. Other than that, that's all there is to say about catching every Pokemon with the Pokewalker. And that's gonna do it for today's video. If you liked the video, leave a like and consider subscribing, as I'll be making more content like this very soon. If you have any other suggestions for videos that you'd like to see, leave a comment below. Follow me on Twitter to keep updated with new videos as they come out. If you're interested in watching me take on challenges live, I've been streaming a lot over my Twitch account, as well as upload highlights to my Johnstone live channel that you can find in the description. Other than that, thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.